Well, if you're in the market for a 6x6 system camera to shoot film, what's your best option? A Hasselblad or a Bronica? Now first, it is worth mentioning a little bit about my history with both of these cameras, and unfortunately I don't have a Hasselblad with me today. I no longer own one. However, I did own and use a Hasselblad 501cm fairly heavily for 4 years, about 10 years ago. And then I sold it to go digital, which was not one of my better moves, as it turns out. Wish I kept hold of it. But about 6 years ago, I decided to get back into film photography seriously, and I bought myself a Bronica SQA, which was the equivalent of the Hasselblad in terms of capabilities and general options in terms of lenses, etc. Now, I bought the Bronica because it was cheaper than the Hasselblad. It was probably about a third of the price at the time, and I haven't been disappointed at all. But how do the two systems stack up, and what are the pros and cons of each? Now first, it's impossible to have this discussion without mentioning that Hasselblad obviously is one of those prestige names, a bit like Leica. If you say you have a Hasselblad, suddenly you become more attractive to the opposite sex. People who know nothing about cameras admire them. I've actually been out shooting with a Bronica on a number of occasions, and people have come up to me and said, "Is that a Hasselblad?" And I've looked a bit disappointed when I said, "No, it's a Bronica," and they don't know what a Bronica is. So it is a beautiful piece of engineering, a beautiful piece of equipment. It's a piece of history. There's a couple of, or 2 or 3 actually, still sat on the moon, 500, I think there's CMs or Cs. And yeah, they're a fantastically made camera with a fantastic image. If you're into that, get a Hasselblad. Absolutely. I mean, you feel 10 foot tall when you're shooting with a Hasselblad. It's probably the same with a Leica, although I've never owned one of those. So yes, in terms of prestige and status, I would definitely say the Hasselblad edges it over the Bronica. Now in terms of the bodies, there is one major difference between the Hasselblad 500 series and the Bronica SQA series. The Bronica is an electronic camera. You set the shutter speed via the body and it conveys that information to the lenses. The Hasselblad is fully manual, no batteries involved. All the settings are made on the lens, and the body is really just a way of holding the film and the lens in place and allowing the lens to make all the settings in terms of aperture, etc. And the body is much simpler. So in terms of simplicity and robustness, the mechanical Hasselblad does have an edge there, you'd think. However, I haven't really had many problems in 6 years with the Bronica. One of my cameras was sent off recently due to a misfire, but that's after a lot of heavy use, and it was fixed by my favourite repairmen, and they said it was in very good condition otherwise, probably about 25-30 years old. Also, the Hasselblad body has probably a bit more flexibility in terms of accessories. The body's been around, I think, since 1957, the 500 range of cameras. And there are lots of third-party options available in terms of prisms and various other screw-in bits, which will allow you to probably keep the system running a lot longer than the Bronica. Now, one of the things I do actually appreciate more about the Bronica system is the fact that the electronic shutter speeds allow me to time my exposures down to 16 seconds without going onto bulb mode. Now, that might not seem like such a big deal, but if you're a landscape photographer, as I predominantly am, I'm very often shooting in the early morning or late in the evening, and my shutter speeds very often run to many seconds. So I like the ability to dial in 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 8 seconds without having to hold the shutter open. It's just something that makes life a lot easier. It doesn't sound much, but when you're actually in the field, it makes a big difference. There's something else I like about the Bronica as well over the Hasselblad, and that is the fact that the cable release screws directly into the side of the body. So when I'm out shooting, and I always use a cable release, I don't have to screw the thing into the front shutter button. The shutter button there is never used. I never use it. I would if I was handheld shooting, but I don't. Now the Hasselblad, on the other hand, you have to screw the cable release into the little release button there. And I found it used to catch very close to the lens. It always felt a bit vulnerable, like I was going to break it. Sometimes it would interfere with lens hoods, etc. So I really do appreciate that placement on the Bronica. Now when we get onto viewfinders, now viewfinders are something you take for granted. You just think it's built into the camera. But although they're very similar 6x6 cameras, the later Hasselblads came with an extremely good finder. The actual screen itself is called the Acute Matte, and it is very, very bright. I think they came in about the mid 90s or so, and they're extremely clear and easy to focus with. Everything snaps in really well. The Bronica isn't on the same level as that, unfortunately. However, if you keep your eyes open, or you're lucky enough, you may come across a BT screen. They made them for lots of cameras years ago, and I've managed to get one in this camera here. It wasn't cheap, and I've already put a couple of marks on it stupidly, but that will bring it up on par with the Hasselblad. But I do like the Hasselblad viewfinder. It's very, very clear indeed. Now, one other thing actually I will mention is with the Hasselblads, to change out the waist level finder for something like this prism finder here, which is relatively easy with the Bronica system. You just take one off and you slide another on, and I do that quite a lot, surprisingly, when I'm shooting. With the Hasselblad, in order to change the actual finder from a prism to a waist level, you need to drop the back off because it can't slide off. And that did frustrate me at times. I used to find myself cursing the design, thinking why couldn't they have just had it so it's flush and you could literally just swap over the finders in a couple of seconds. Taking the back off every time, putting the dark slide in is a little bit of a pain. Now, the next area to consider is the film backs. Now, film backs, as the name suggests, is the piece of equipment which holds the film in place. They're both pretty similar in terms of design. You know, they've got a dark slide in there to stop the light getting in when you're not shooting with it. And, you know, fairly robust, well made, very, very solid build. However, I did prefer the design on the Hasselblad because the cartridge with the film slid into the side and you locked it securely with a big key on the side. And it was very robust. I have found with the Bronica, if you grab the camera quite, I wouldn't say roughly, but so without caution, and pull it out your camera bag, thus, I have had the back pop open a couple of times, probably about 3 or 4 times now. And it's not something you want to do because it will fog the film. So I'm very careful when I'm handling the Bronica and pulling it in and out the bag. It's okay once it's out, but if you just catch these little clips here, you can pop the back open. Another thing as well is people have said that the backs on the Bronica SQ are the weak point of the system, but I've not found that personally. I've found them very, very good. Spacing's perfect. Whereas with the Hasselblad, they did used to go out of alignment and get tight from time to time, and they would have to go off for a service. But being Hasselblad and being totally mechanical and you know, built like a brick, they would come back perfect every time. So minor nuisance, but something to be wary of. Now, the big thing, of course, to talk about is lenses. Lenses are the key of any camera system. You know, we all talk about the classic Nikon lineup. One of the reasons I'm with Nikon for 35mm is the lens options. They're absolutely superb. Can't be faulted for my uses. Now, the Hasselblad, again, perfect lens lineup going back many, many years, over 60 years now. Early C lenses as the CF, CFEs, CBs. I haven't had them all. I've only had a limited range of lenses. But to summarise, I think if you want the absolute ultimate choice of lenses, then Hasselblad is the way to go. However, as a landscape photographer who typically uses a moderate wide angle, a standard lens like this one on my Bronica, this is an 80mm, and 150mm, then you're pretty much covered in both systems. There's a number of options in each. Now, I would say that from my eye and from my years of shooting with them, I could see no real difference between the 80mm or the 150mm between the Bronica and the Hasselblad. Not quite the same case, sadly, with the standard wide angle, the 50mm. The Bronica has, I would say, a weak point in its lens lineup there. It's just not as sharp as the Hasselblad lens. I had the 50mm CF FLE, which was an unbelievably good wide angle lens. Stop it down to f/22, it just looked perfect. Absolutely superb, you know, 24-inch square enlargements, looked fantastic. So if you're seriously into wide angles, you may want to consider the Hasselblad. However, the 40mm Bronica, which I also use, is very, very good. The 40mm Zenzonon, that is a superb lens. So yes, all in all, it's pretty much of a wash, but there is more choice with the Hasselblad, and there are some absolutely stellar lenses in that lineup. Now, it wouldn't be fair doing a comparison to mention the elephant in the room, which is cost. How much is it going to cost you to put together one of these systems? Well, I don't know what they cost in your country. It's 2021 at the moment, and I think the difference in price is considerable enough to make a decision for me quite easy. the Hasselblad is 2.5 to 3 times the price of the Bronica for the same outfit with the same lenses. Even years ago, when film equipment was at its lowest ebb in 2009, when I bought my Hasselblad, it cost me £3,000 to get a body, 2 backs and 3 lenses. The equivalent Bronica at the time was probably about £700–800. Probably cost you now for a 3-lens outfit, one of these in very good condition, at least £1,000. So it's going to be about a third, maybe slightly less of the cost, but it's a big difference. Now, if you're a serious shooter, that might not be an issue to you, but if you're a casual photographer or a hobbyist, that's quite a big difference. So in terms of value for money, I would definitely say that the Bronica wins. So to sum up, what have we learned? Well, we've learned that they've probably got more similarities than differences. Now, I personally, I can't really split them in terms of functionality. There's some things I love about the Bronica, like I've mentioned already, the shutter speeds and the cable release position, the value for money. I've got a load of lenses. But the things I love about the Blad, I love the design of the Blad. I think it's a much nicer looking design. It's nicer in the hand. Also, the mechanical nature of it means it will probably last longer. They're fiddly to fix, some of the Bronicas, according to my repairman. There are also other systems out there. You could look at the Rollei SL66, which is quite a unique camera in that it has front tilt built into the camera body, so you can treat it a bit like large format with movements and get more depth of field. A friend of mine had the system about 10 years ago, and he did actually sell it and get a Hasselblad though, because he found the reliability of the body quite suspect, and also he reckoned that the lenses were knocking on a bit. Some of them weren't quite up to the same levels of the Hasselblad, so he didn't end up getting a 501 Hasselblad. But I would say, whatever you do, make sure you get a good one. Now that might mean buying from a dealer. I bought both my Hasselblad and my Bronica from a dealer, so I had a guarantee. There's a lot of old dogs out there which will let you down. They've been hammered and battered. Yeah, be careful, be very careful. Make sure you get something you can return. eBay is good at times, it's great at times, but buyer beware. So just watch out if you're out on the internet. And it's described as mint. Yeah, these are all cameras. The Hasselblads, I think they sort of stopped making them probably about 15–20 years ago, the 500 series in earnest. And the Bronicas are, you know, some of them are 40 years old now. The SQs, the original. SQAIs, maybe 30 years old. Get the best you can. You won't regret it. So, to sum up, I think, you know, you'd be happy with either of these cameras. But yes, if you've got the money, get a Hasselblad. I'm not ruling out getting one in the future again. There's just something about it. It's a Hasselblad. The quality of the body, the build, the looks of it as well. It's nicer design camera. But having said that, the Bronica is a real workhorse, an absolute workhorse. It's really solid and reliable, and it will get the job done, a fraction of the cost. You know, lens quality, apart from that mention of the wide angle, the 50mm, you won't see the difference. I can't see the difference in my enlargement, so I'm really very pleased with the Bronica system. And even if I do get a Hasselblad, I won't be selling the Bronica. It's something I'm going to hang on to forever, well, as long as I'm around anyway. So yes, I hope you did enjoy this brief discussion of the pros and cons of two of the most popular 6x6 system cameras. And if you're in the market for one, good luck. You won't be disappointed. I think you'll love shooting with them. I absolutely adore them. And yes, thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon.